Returning data as text. In this chapter, you will learn some more techniques for using the response text property to add functionality to AJAX applications. In previous lessons, we discussed the individual components that make AJAX work, culminating in a complete AJAX application. We also discussed more complex AJAX technologies, examining how you can extend what you know to develop more sophisticated AJAX applications. For this chapter, we'll look a little more closely at the response text property of the XML HTTP request object and see how we can give our application some extra functionality via its use. The XML HTTP request object provides two properties that contain information received from the server, namely response text and response XML. The former presents the calling application with the server data in string format, whereas the latter provides DOM-compatible XML that can be parsed using JavaScript methods. Although the response XML property allows you to carry out some sophisticated programming tasks, much can be achieved just by manipulating the value stored in the response text property. The term text is perhaps a little misleading. The response text property contains a character string, the value of which you can assign to a JavaScript variable via a simple assignment statement. There is no rule saying that the value contained in such a string must be legible text. In fact, the value can contain complete gibberish provided that the string contains only characters that JavaScript accepts in a string variable. This fact allows a degree of flexibility in what sorts of information you can transfer using this property. Perhaps the simplest example is to consider the use of the value held in response text in updating the textual part of a page element, say a div container. In this case, you may simply take the returned string and apply it to the page element in question. Here's a simple example. The following is the HTML code for an HTML page that forms the basis for an AJAX application. Clearly, this is a simple page that, as it stands, would merely output the line, "Here is the text returned by the server," and nothing else. Now, suppose that we add to the page the necessary JavaScript routines to generate an instance of an XML HTTP request object, in this case called HTTP, and make a server request in response to the onload event handler of the page's body element. This listing shows the source code for the revised page. Most and probably all of this code will be familiar from previous chapters. The part that interests us here is the callback function useHTTPResponse, which contains these lines. Here we have simply assigned the value received in response text to become the content of our chosen div container. Running the preceding code with the simple server-side script produces this screen display. Now, let's modify the code from the preceding example. HTML markup is entirely composed of tags written using text characters. If the value contained in the response text property is to be used for modifying the display of the page from which the server request is being sent, there is nothing to stop us having our server script include HTML markup in the information it returns. Here is our code we previously used, but with a modified server script. As a slightly more involved example, consider the case where the server script generates more complex output. We want our application to take this server output and display it as the contents of a table. This time, we'll use our server-side PHP script to generate some tabular information. Once again, using our previous code to call the server-side script via XML HTTP request, we obtain a page as displayed in this example. So far, we have demonstrated ways to return text that may be directly applied to an element on a web page. So far, so good. However, if you are willing to do a little more work in JavaScript to manipulate the returned data, you can achieve even more. Provided that the server returns a string value in the response text property of the XML HTTP request object, you can use any data format you may devise to encode information within it. Consider the following server-side script, which uses the same data array as in the previous example. The string returned in the response text property now contains the days of the week, separated or delimited by the pipe character. If we copy this string into a JavaScript variable myString, we will find that the variable myString contains the following string. We may now conveniently divide this string into an array using JavaScript's split method. We now have a JavaScript array results containing our data. Rather than simply displaying the received data, we can now use it in JavaScript routines in any way we want. With little effort, the XML HTTP request object's response text property can be persuaded to do more than simply return some text to display in a web page. For all but the most complex data formats, it may prove simpler to manipulate response text than to deal with the added complexity of XML. In this chapter, you saw several examples of this technique, ranging from the simple update of text content within a page element to the manipulation of more complex data structures. You can now test your knowledge in the quiz area, access the scripts we learned in the lab, or go through the lesson again. The choice is yours. Thank you for choosing Sam's Teach Yourself.